Hello everyone, we're talking about qualitative research today. And with qualitative research, this is one of the most important methods for social workers because what we do is we interpret what our clients tell us, right? And you find meaning in what they're saying. And many of the subjects that you guys propose for your paper involve understanding what people tell you and can't necessarily be standardized with specific response options. There are many advantages and disadvantages to this we're going to learn about today. There's a discussion board this week, and on the discussion board you have to list 2 of the main tenets of qualitative research. On the screen right now you see 5 of those tenets, so just pick 2. So we need to describe in your own words about how qualitative research is based on words and interpreting what people tell you, and not things that can be numeric. That's only important for surveys and other larger scale kind of things like experiments and the like. So interpretation is everything in qualitative work, so the role of the researcher and their perspective is critical to consider, and we're trying to get the kind of holistic view and the context in which our research participants live, and that's often what's missing, is understanding that each of us is unique in some way, and the environment and what makes us unique in that moment is what's important. Data collection and analysis can be concurrent in the sense that as you're interviewing someone, you can modify your questions and go with the flow. We're going to see later that there's an interview guide, and the interview guide gives us a general goal of what we're trying to get at, but we can modify the questions we ask depending on what our research participants are telling us. And we're not there to use statistics, we're not there to use math. And for your quiz this week, you need to know that we don't use standardized measures in qualitative work. Nothing is standardized, only open-ended questions. This slide shows us about some of the benefits and the challenges. The benefits is that we can get at the nuance, we can get at the different idiosyncrasies of each person's life and understand what's unique about them. It can help us construct a theoretical explanation about their perspective. And this idea of phenomenology, this is something on the quiz. Phenomenology is understanding the perspective of another person. And in order to get at that perspective, we need to ask in-depth questions and capture a more in-depth perspective about what is unique about that person. So phenomenology is one of the qualitative methods, and it's a type of qualitative research. Though that phenomenology is mentioned on the same question where they're asking about standardized instruments, and it's important to know that we do not use standardized instruments in qualitative work. Now the negative side of it is that it takes a lot of time to interview people, and if you're interviewing people one by one, you're not going to be able to interview a lot of people because you invest so much time in each person. And the quality of that interviewing can require specialized training in order to make there be a strong rapport between you and the research subject, and in order to make the conversation flow smoothly, it takes a lot of practice and skill. And so it's sensitive to data sources that are not credible or lack the trust of the researcher. Because the basis of your preconceptions that you have before the survey may be some things that are not necessarily true. And so coming into it with a blank mind helps us to get around some of those, the challenges we have of assumptions. Grounded theory is the method where we assume nothing is true and we only observe, and based on what we observe, we formulate our perspective. So in the hopes that the grounded theory allows us to start all over again and rebuild our understanding without any assumptions. But it's not easy to replicate these kind of studies. Depending on who you get and their mood at that time and the environment, you might get slightly different answers. So qualitative is open to interpretation and while offers us a lot of potential, there's a lot of potential error as well. Though in some cases there may not be a true right or wrong in a lot of the topics we're studying. It's all about getting at different perspectives. That said, we have flexible questions and answers that we're trying to get, and it's semi-structured. On your quiz, it's going to ask you something along the lines of whether it's a kind of standardized approach. And it's not highly structured, it's not standardized at all. In fact, I have here the interview guide for a study that I'm working on. It's an interview guide for a study where we're collecting data on women 85 and older who regularly engage in exercise classes. And the question is, what makes people continue to exercise even they've already lived so long? That's the basic concept. And so the student that's developing the study has 8 questions that she wants to ask in general. But with the interview guides, it's not necessarily going to go exactly like this. It's just the general theme so that the Institutional Review Board can say whether or not she's on an ethical study. And it also gives her the sense that these are the general topics she's hoping to cover, but depending on how the conversation goes, she may or may not address these kinds of things, like what do these classes mean to you? How often do you attend these exercise classes? How do you schedule the time so that you can exercise regularly? What are the physical benefits of exercise from your perspective? How do you perceive the mental benefits? How do you perceive the social benefits? These kind of topics. So there's a general flow to the conversation, and that's the whole goal of the interview guide. Have this sort of semi-structured, in-depth analysis of the research question. In this case, what makes you want to continue exercising in a formal class when you're already age 85? So detailed interviews allows the opportunity for lengthy explanations, people can reflect out loud, and it gives us the opportunity to collect key words that we can then explore later when we get to the analysis side. Our primary concern is to hear the respondents' perspectives in their own words. That's that phenomenological perspective. And the interview guide gives us some guidance about how we're going to get there, how we're going to answer the questions, and with a lot of open-ended questions that allow people to share as much as they're thinking as possible. In order to create this interview guide, we brainstorm about all the possible questions we might ask, and we try to organize the questions so there's a flow, there's a theme sense, so people know where the conversation is going. If we're asking a sensitive question, like, do you think you're going to die soon? Whatever that sensitive question may be, you make that towards the end after you've already built the rapport. And we try to, we seek feedback from the participants as it's going, and we have this methodological journal where we're tracking how we think the conversation is going and noting any nonverbal cues that might be happening, any sense of discomfort the person is showing and the like. So we ask them questions about why, and can you tell me more about that? We try not to lead on with any particular answer so that they can answer it however they think makes sense. So some of the pros and cons of recording. We record in large part if we can because it allows us to get a transcript. A transcript allows us to kind of accurately get everything that was said and listen to it again and again and capture some of the nuance of the emotions and the connotations that people might have interpreted it. But of course, not everything can be recorded. Sometimes people refuse to allow the recording, so then we just take handwritten notes to the extent we can during the interview as well as after. Note anything that we think was important. Field notes are our observations about what we observed, whether it's discomfort, nonverbal signs of their emotions during the time, any disturbances that might have happened, anything that we might be important when we're interpreting what they said later on. We need to think about the power dynamic when we're doing interviews. If there's a big age difference, a racial difference, a socioeconomic difference, it can affect how the rapport of the conversation may go. And so the power dynamic should be considered when we're interpreting the results. Also, the location should be in a location that's familiar and comfortable to the person being interviewed, in the sense that they might give you a different answer if they're not as comfortable in the environment. And demonstrating respect and cultural sensitivity whenever possible is really important. If the participant feels that you're coming from a non-judgmental standpoint, they might be willing to share more than if they sense that you're disagreeing with them. And so one of the major approaches is called focus groups. This is between 3 to 12 people, and you're just guiding the conversation, keeping the conversation on topic. Usually we only have 2 or 3 main topics we want to cover. We don't ask as detailed a question, and the idea is to stimulate conversation among the participants. Ideally they don't know each other, and what you're taking notes on is the dynamics between the people, getting at whether they were engaged with the topic, whether they were excited about the topic, and what kind of details were important to them. Movies, whenever they're testing out different endings or different characters, they'll do focus groups and get feedback from the group. And it isn't so much the response of any one person that matters, but the general feeling of the whole group. And so for topics for which there's large group interest, you might want to do a focus group as the approach. It's much more time efficient than individual interviews. You get a lot more perspectives, and it's cheaper and less time consuming than most other qualitative approaches. That's why it's one of the most popular. So it's basically a planned group discussion where you're keeping track of how the discussion goes and what kind of interactions the participants had. And on your test, you need to know that we can't promise confidentiality. We can only communicate that we will do our best to be confidential, but it cannot be assured. And on the screen you see the word homogeneity. This is the idea that there are multiple viewpoints. It's very easy for a group to have groupthink happen, and it seems like there's consensus, everyone thinks the same, when in fact there is more heterogeneity than that. Focus groups are prone to this homogeneous beliefs, at least results where it feels like everyone is feeling similarly, when in fact there might in fact be more variability in how people feel. So our goal is to stimulate conversation, not ask individual questions, and we're responsible for explaining the expectations of the communication, so that way the participants have a sense of how the conversation should go, and the person leading the group can provide guidance and feedback along the way to ensure everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts. There should be another participant who's focused on taking notes, so that way nonverbal reactions and such and some key moments can be noted while the conversation is occurring. We typically provide incentives around $10 to $20 per person. So on the right it says that they can be expensive in the sense that you might be paying $300 for this group of people to have a conversation so you can listen in on what they're saying. But the fact that you're paying them helps keep them on topic and help them be part of your, be on your team basically, and providing you information that you're looking for. You get in-depth data from a large number of people, up to 15 people at a time. It helps us understand social processes, especially the dynamic between people when they're discussing topics. A lot of sensitive political topics are studied looking at focus groups, looking at how passionate people are on both sides of the issue and how they interact with each other. And we can observe interactions, and that can be part of the focus of the analysis. That said, few people may dominate the conversation, and we may lose the perspective of each individual. We're not tracking the perspective of each individual, it's only the big picture. And again, we can't ensure confidentiality. So when we analyze it, we're looking for a transcript. The transcript is a written copy of everything that is said. And we go through a coding process in order to analyze and look for themes. You'll see some YouTube videos that look at this coding process and looking at different ways that we can identify themes and see how those themes are related to outcomes later on. And it's ideal that the interviewer does the transcription because they're the most familiar with the topic. So we're trying to break down long paragraphs into codes, into kind of specific keywords. And when you've captured enough data, when you reach the point of saturation. That's on your quiz. So saturation is when you start to get the same responses from people again and again. So you talked to 15 people and 5 of them told you the same thing. So you start to get the sense of, okay, I think I've captured a variety of perspectives and I'm starting to get the same result again and again. So that's the idea of saturation. Know that we don't use standardized instruments when we're looking at qualitative designs. Qualitative is all about open-ended, nothing standardized. And know that we're not using highly structured questioning. We're only using lightly suggested plan of discussion. Know that focus groups are useful for studying social processes. That's really the key thing for the quiz. Focus groups are social process machines, so that we can explore how a social process occurs in the mind of the group of people. And know that when we're doing, if your goal is to gather very detailed information, you want to go with the in-depth interviews. So in-depth interviews for in-depth, deep understanding. They're very detailed. And then there's a tricky question on the quiz where it's talking about what qualitative methods are useful for, and it has an all of the above and none of the above, which is very tempting to pick, but think more carefully. And think that it's important that qualitative methods are there to provide vivid descriptions and understanding of how results come to pass. So results come to pass through the descriptions that we have. So qualitative methods provide a vivid description and understanding of how results come to pass. And we keep interviewing people until we reach the sense of saturation, that we've captured all that there is to capture, and know that the credibility is really important. I think we saw that on the slide over here somewhere. Well, credibility is the degree to which the results are accurate and believable according to the participants. And finally, remember that qualitative methods are the naturalistic form of inquiry, where the researcher themselves is the instrument in data collection, and the reports focus on narrative and stories, and what's the common ingredients in us all. So with that, I think you have some sense of what qualitative approach is, and we will discuss this more on the discussion board, and I'll get back to you with more comments on your papers. Thank you so much.